A nation rich in diversity, culture, and abundance of natural resources, Nigeria faces a pressing challenge: food insecurity. It is reported that over 35 million people will be affected by acute food shortage by the end of 2025. Notably, children are impacted the most, with the malnutrition rate rising to over 2 million in the Northeast in 2023, posing a risk of high child mortality triggered by acute malnutrition, as the population is projected to grow to over 377 million people by 2025, with increasing risk of climate change impacting agriculture. The question arises: could genetically modified organisms or GMOs be the promise that Nigeria needs, or do they pose perilous risk?
About the state of food insecurity in Nigeria as it is today, obviously, everyone who is living in this country will know that the dimension of insecurity is so high. A lot of factors are responsible for this situation that we have with us today as a nation. If you look at it generally, you'll find that farmers today, to start with, can't go to farm. That is something that is normal, that is common to everyone in Nigeria today, that farmers can't go to farm anymore. Personally, I'm a farmer, although I don't farm in remote areas. But I can imagine being a farmer, farming in a remote area where I am not secured going to the farm. That's a major issue. And then we can find that happening all over the country. But for now, we are aware that we don't really have this kind of situation with us growing up years back. The only problem I know we have in Nigeria is how to store, how to preserve the numerous food crops that we produce year in, year out in our nation, Nigeria. You go to Benue, during the orange season, you find it in surplus.
After nearly a decade of research by Ipsos scientists, Nigeria approved its first genetically modified food crop, pest-resistant cowpea. In 2019, the National Biosafety Management Agency allowed the environmental release of GM cowpea, affirming the crop safety. It also paved the way for commercializing GM cowpea and making the seeds available to farmers. Speaking on this, Dr. Abdulhamani Issoufou, country director of the African Agricultural Technology Foundation, said Nigerian scientists worked with institutions in Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Malawi. Seydou Madagwa, executive secretary of the Agricultural Research Council of Nigeria, which coordinates agricultural research in Nigeria, said the council was proud to present Nigerians with the first homegrown genetically modified food crop. He said it has passed all necessary scientific and safety tests.
So, for the purposes of today, yes, we work on crop improvement, we work on breeding, and mainly of 6 crops, which is to say cassava, yam, bananas and plantains, maize, cowpea, soybean. Now, the work we do in terms of varieties that we release does not involve GMO, but it does involve modern techniques of molecular biology, genomics, understanding the genetic makeup of these crops, and being able to accelerate the process of breeding through that understanding, but not GMO as such. So that's where we stand in terms of varieties. Now,
Notwithstanding the accolades that has come the way of genetically modified organisms in Nigeria, the research conducted in Enugu market showed that out of the 100 participants, 41.7% were interested, while 21.7% were fairly interested, 15% were neutral, and another 21.7% were indifferent. What could be the reason for these varied views about what was supposed to be a promise? First, what is GMOs or genetically modified organisms?
GMO, you're talking about genetic modification
Yes.
of an organism, whether plant, or animal, in a way that you have what we call transgenic. You insert a gene, from another on another, organism that is different from that particular organism. For example, you pick genes, from animal, you insert it into plants, you know, which is almost the same as this use of transgender. So it's transgenic, Well, the implication most times, is that it has a lot of, challenges. Globally, GMO produce and products face a lot of, you know, fear, uncertainty, and that's the reason why production, countries that have adopted it is decreasing as we speak. Many countries that adopted it before, they have abolished, such policies because number one, there are so many challenges that are attached to GMO. The uncertainty, of the impact of these on human health
So,
is
but
still on there. It's still there because we don't have sufficient scientific data, long data, to prove that this may not have adverse effect on human health. That
Beyond the farmers, there is also a wide division among various institutions on the perception of GMOs. The government, agri-biotech investors, and affiliated scientists are with the views that it will help in combating food scarcity, lack of environmental resource, weeds, and disease infestation.
Personally, as a person, as an leader of an association, we have been fighting for this GMO of a thing. There are too many interpretations about GMO, but people, all what we know about GMO is genetically modified foods and feeds, even for human being and for animal. Now, why do we modify food genetically? There are many countries in the world today. Now, Nigeria cannot export food to foreign countries because our food are GMO. And the same government who knows that exportation is what brings forex to this country. And if agricultural produce is rejected in other countries, now you know that means the GMO is not accepted. Of course, if it is accepted in other countries, in Nigeria, if you cannot export the produce, then that means it's not a good thing for the country. We have looked at it all around that. Why are you introducing GMO? Is it that we lack land to produce, or that a GMO seed can give you double of your conventional seed? If the answer is yes, where do you want to plant the GMO? Can you plant it in a parlor? Can you plant it inside your room? You still go down to the field where there is insecurity. That is why you say plant this thing. We are talking to the government that look, Nigerian farmers do not need GMO, they doesn't need telomeres, they doesn't need anything. Our conventional seed, our traditional seed is okay for us. Any type is still okay for us. All what we need is enabling environment. We need security for our farmers in the farmland.
On the other hand, the independent scientists, environmentalists, farmers, and consumers warned that their introduction may pose new risks to food security, atmosphere, and community health. Among these threats are environmental pollution and endangering biodiversity. While proponents of genetically modified organisms argue that these crops can significantly boost agricultural productivity and contribute to economic growth. Why is the issue of genetically modified organisms becoming contentious in Nigeria?
there is regulation in Nigeria. As you know, there has been the release not through IITA, but of a genetically modified cowpea has been released. So it is supportive, but what I'm saying is the regulations for the GMO are, they are there much more than they're there for the gene-edited products. So gene-edited products, there are none that are coming through in Nigeria at the moment. But if they do come through, the regulation will be the same as for, if you like, what we call conventionally bred varieties. Yeah, so there's that important distinction between genetically modified and gene edited. The regulation will be different. And most of the focus these days in IITA in many places is in the editing. Okay, that's a more, because of the regulatory aspects, but also in some ways it's a more powerful technique. But of course, editing alone does not produce a new variety. So you still need to include, if editing were to be used, you would still need some element of breeding to bring that into a variety that could be developed for the market. And the work that we're doing on editing within IITA is really for traits such as disease resistance, which do not have variation within that crop. So in other words, editing is really the only way to bring in the variation that we can use to enhance the crop. For example, for a pest or disease resistance, where there is no variation occurring within that crop. Yeah?
And possibly across Africa and the world. Despite the potential benefits, genetically modified organisms remain a contentious issue. Critics raise concerns about their long-term impact on health, the environment, and farmers' livelihoods.
So which means that every food, either food, produce or product, should have the right information for individuals to say, yes, I want this, I don't want. It's like cigarettes. It is written on cigarette that smokers are liable to die early, but government has not prescribed purchase of cigarettes, except that they say maybe you're under 18, So what's there? It's by choice, so that anybody that wants to smoke, knows what could be the likely implication. So the same thing we are talking about when it comes to this GM. Let this be appropriately labeled. That is the way it is done in civilized countries, in countries where they have appropriate regulations. That's the way it happens.
As Nigeria grapples with the genetically modified organisms debate, a balanced approach is needed. Policymakers, scientists, and farmers must work together to ensure that any adoption of genetically modified organisms is safe, equitable, and beneficial to all Nigerians.
My recommendation is that the environment should be conducive. One, security for our farmers. Like we can see today that many of our farmers are no longer in the farm. That's a major step to addressing food insecurity. Then number two, we have to find a way to preserve our farm produce rather. When we produce crops, you find that some of our crops are perishable, and because they are not, we don't have a good storage system, they perish, and at the end of the day, we are perceived to be seen as not having enough food to take care of ourselves. As for whether, I know you might ask me that, whether GMO is an answer to food insecurity, my answer is no. GMO is a false solution. It's a false solution because in the first place, it is going to enslave us. It is another level of food slavery, seed slavery, because you cannot plant back what you have harvested in the first place, and what you have planted can corrupt the natural seed, which we all know. And of course, it is not labeled. And so, if GMO as claimed to be the solution, And at the end of the day, every year I have to go back to get seed from, the one who controls what I have to plant. Then when he decides not to give me seed, I'm in trouble.
How do we allay these fears about genetically modified organisms?
You say that is the case, that many people have, if you like, developed that idea that there's something maybe unsafe about it. I think there's really two things. People who think maybe it's not a safe thing to do, and people who are worried about, the seed companies and that side of it in terms of controlling seed supply. Obviously, for any genetic modification, there is a lot of regulation that has to be gone by, including looking at the safety aspects of these crops. In many cases, we're not really introducing anything that has any likelihood of being unsafe. And then the other aspect, particularly when IITA, we work with national programs. It's the national programs that release the varieties. So we work closely with national programs. We work closely with smallholder farmers themselves. So every stage, they could be brought into what is happening. But again, I want to say that at the moment, we are not developing any GM varieties. So this is a sort of hypothetical thing, but it would involve a lot of working with the farmers, working with the national programs to really to increase that level of awareness of what traits are actually being introduced through GM.
The future of Nigeria's food security may be in a blend of tradition and innovation as the nation navigates the complex terrain of genetically modified organisms and increasing food insecurity. The promise of a well-fed, prosperous Nigeria remains within reach. Join us as we continue to explore the impact of genetically modified organisms on our nation, examining the promise, the hold, and the challenges we must overcome to ensure a secure and sustainable future for all Nigerians.